Resident Evil's first foray into the on-rail shooter, the Umbrella Chronicles, while not exactly an amazing title, did manage to impress enough to greenlight a sequel. This second crack at the genre would show a genuine desire for improvement and a real willingness to fix some issues, a trait not exactly common among current Capcom sequels. Even though I'm not what you would call a fan of this type of game, or hell, even the console it was released on, I'm definitely willing to endure anything for another chance at jumping back into Raccoon City's demolished streets. So, can the Darkside Chronicles do the impossible and actually make me enjoy waggling a wiimote around? Well, I'm Jared from Avalanche Reviews, and welcome to the Resident Evil Retrospective. To my complete surprise, Capcom's retelling of RE0, 1, and 3, The Umbrella Chronicles, sold and reviewed well enough to warrant a sequel. Masachika Kawata was back at the helm, Kavya was back on board, and it seemed like no one involved was interested in churning out a clone of their previous game. Kawata was dead set on bringing more of Resident Evil's horror to the experience, and knew that would require a big step up in fidelity. This time around, with no ready-made current-gen assets at their disposal, the devs would have to build this experience from the ground up, leading to a very unique look and some insanely impressive displays of the Wii's graphical prowess. Typically, this is where I would tell you about some interesting aspect of the game's development, but honestly, there's nothing to tell. The team wanted to improve on their last attempt and then proceeded to do just that. Other than a claim that the Anglican Church in the UK had some complaints that Capcom was glorifying violence and the occult, there's not too much to report here. Maybe the Capcom development curse tends to skip a few titles in the series.
Scared me.
Eyes forward.
Just like the game before it, Darkside Chronicles aims to retell past RE events, specifically Parts 2 and Code Veronica. But unlike the last game, there's a unique story weaving these two retreads together. Taking place after 2 and before Part 4, this brand new story involves Leon and Jack Krauser working as Special Forces members investigating a possible Umbrella BOW deal going down in South America. Even though Krauser was never really a compelling character for me, it is nice getting to see him and Leon when they were partners. The general idea is these two encounter the effects of the T. Veronica virus, and in an attempt at catching Krauser up to the events so far, we get to relive a little bit of RE history. And I have to say, it is crystal clear right from the beginning that the devs made sure this wasn't another cheap-feeling cash-in. The main events of each game in question are pretty damn accurate, and even though we're short one scenario compared to the last game, the two we have are much longer and more true to the source material. In my review of Umbrella Chronicles, I gave the story a pass since it was just set dressing for an on-rail shooter, but looking back after my time with Darkside, Umbrella is looking pretty crappy in comparison. The voice acting and writing are leagues above the last game, but don't think that means a complete lack of awkwardly delivered lines. I mean, this is a Resident Evil game after all. Listen guys, I'll be honest, I think this game may have raised the bar for me. I went into the first entry of this Wii shooter series with low expectations and essentially settled for what I got, but Darkside Chronicles has shown me that it is 100% possible to make one of these games but still stay faithful to the source material. The main story taking place in between the two flashbacks isn't exactly Oscar-worthy, but it's actually pretty interesting and does a great job of tying itself to the other games. One of my complaints with UC was that it didn't include the more iconic voice actors we've all come to know, but Darkside Chronicles does us all a solid by including a lot of the original actors from the series, which is a good thing because, as we all know, without Allison Court, there can be no Claire Redfield.
Wait, Steve, he's here somewhere. We can't leave without him.
I can honestly say that I was really impressed with the effort that went into this story. Not only was it clear that the team respected the classics, but the original narrative that ties everything together feels like a genuine RE tale. I think this is exactly what Capcom should be doing with their current sequels. Darkside storytelling is a vast improvement on what Umbrella had to offer, and showed me that with a little bit of reverence and a lot of effort, the words story and rail shooter can be used unironically in the same sentence. On-rail shooters tend to be pretty simple. If you've ever played one, you can rest assured you have a full understanding of the rest. Well, Darkside Chronicles isn't exactly bucking that trend. Just like its predecessor, it features first-person shooting but only allows you to control your aiming reticle. While you're on this set course, enemies will wander into view, and you're in charge of making them regret that decision. In this sense, Darkside follows right in Umbrella's tracks, but deviates in one very small, minute way. It's actually really good. Seriously, this game improved on every complaint I had with the last entry, and even improved on some of the things I was personally really content with, so where do I start? Well, first off, the odd delay in moving the on-screen reticle that I complained about in Umbrella is no longer present, making for some much more enjoyable gameplay. At first I thought this was due to a lower difficulty level overall, but going back and looking at the footage, there doesn't seem to be that big of a difference between the two. It's crazy how much a small tweak like this could make for such a big improvement, but coming straight from one to the other, I can assure you it definitely has. Getting accurate shots and putting down your foes before they get a chance to attack is no longer left up to chance, and this left me feeling much more accomplished by the end of the level. Getting torn apart by a challenging part of a game is never ideal, but when I'm sure it was due to my own lack of skill and not some arbitrary hurdle put in between me and the game's controls, I get much more eager to jump back in and give it another shot. And praise the Capcom gods, there is now an option to adjust the vertical and horizontal sensitivity of your wiimote. This was sorely needed in the first game, but the compliments don't stop there. Darkside also lets you dial in the amount of force needed to trigger a reload. Now, this may not sound like a big deal, but you'll be reloading a lot, and long sessions with Umbrella Chronicles left me with a pretty sore wrist. Now, there's a masturbation joke in there. I'm not seeing it. Next up on the list is the inclusion of an inventory screen. In the last game, herbs were used as soon as you obtained them, meaning if you didn't need one at the moment, well, too bad. But you can choose when to heal now, and even more importantly, switch out your weapons at a moment's notice. This means running out of ammo for the shotgun during a boss fight isn't the death sentence it used to be. Weapon customization has also made a return and has a lot more depth to it now. Getting enough money to fully upgrade a weapon will take some grinding, but the game's fun enough that I did just that to nearly max out my pistol. All around, this is such a huge upgrade from the original that it's hard calling it a sequel. It's almost like Umbrella was some type of work in progress and Darkside is the finished product. Everything has been improved on to a pretty surprising degree, and this game would have a perfect score for me if it weren't for one pretty big downside. During development, the game's director pushed to include more of the series' trademark horror elements, and decided the best way to do this was to make the player feel like they were in the game, and apparently this means adding a metric shit ton of camera wobble. The erratic swaying back and forth is supposed to mimic that found footage type of look, a trend that has thankfully died off since the game's release. If you're the type of person who's even a little bit affected by motion sickness, this will likely have you puking your guts out within the first 20 minutes of gameplay. If you don't have issues with radically swaying motion, don't worry, this wobble will piss you off in other ways. Hitting a boss's weak point in shooters like this is supposed to be kind of challenging, but throw in some insane camera movements and you've got yourself some serious frustration. This issue isn't too bad in the beginning of the game, but around the point when you're fighting the last formation of T-103 in RE2's campaign, you'll start to notice the boss's weak points become much harder to hit, meaning you won't be interrupting a lot of their attacks. As the difficulty goes up, this camera sway will be the cause of 90% of your deaths, but on the plus side, I noticed that I kind of got used to it after a while. Sure, it still kept me from beating most bosses on my first try, but luckily the gameplay is solid enough to make up for this pretty obvious downside. On top of this, there are fairly regular dips in frame rate. These moments of slowdown are kind of easy to ignore most of the time, but there are 2 or 3 boss fights where you'll see less than 20 frames per second, and that sucks. Which brings me to your only other legitimate way of playing Darkside Chronicles. The HD collection on the PS3 is the same exact experience, but allows for the use of the much more accurate PS Move controllers. Since I still don't own these things, I can't guarantee anything, but I did play through the first 3 areas with a controller, and nothing jumped out at me as being too different. Thanks to the tight regulations in the Japanese Sero rating boards, the really cool looking decapitations have been taken out, but I doubt too many people will consider that a deal breaker. This HD version of Darkside does have an okay aim assist for when you're using a regular controller, and even though this helps, I doubt you'd get past the halfway point of the game this way. Analog control just doesn't seem to be precise enough, and for some reason, this version of the game doesn't have the sensitivity adjustments that made the Wii game so fun. If you have access to the PS Move accessories, this will probably be the version to go for, but honestly, the Wii version doesn't exactly trail too far behind it. Overall, this was a really fun game. I had an absolute blast running through some of my favorite settings in the RE universe and reliving some iconic moments. The shooting is spot on and the steep difficulty curve feels pretty fair to me. If you're stuck deciding on which of the Chronicles games to play, it's Darkside hands down. In my last review, I said if you aren't a fan of rail shooters, Umbrella probably won't change that, but Darkside flips that recommendation on its head. Even if you don't like this genre, spend the $8 to $20 it goes for and get yourself one of the best rail shooters I have ever played. It should be no surprise to anyone that the Wii wasn't exactly a graphical powerhouse in its day. Nintendo was more worried about pushing its motion controls and opted to stuff what was essentially an overclocked GameCube into their little white rectangle. This meant we couldn't really expect it to keep up with a 360 or PS3, so imagine my surprise when I booted up Darkside Chronicles and saw an absolutely beautiful 480p true widescreen picture. Seriously, this game looks amazing. Now maybe it's just me, but I can't remember too many Wii games that look this impressive. Since the games being covered in this trip down memory lane couldn't be recreated with assets from any pre-existing remake, the team behind Darkside built everything from the ground up, making for a completely uniform look between each scenario, something Umbrella Chronicles definitely struggled with. These new takes on classic environments look downright amazing, and despite the obvious aliasing that comes with high detail 480p, manages to look like a downscaled version of something released on one of the Wii's more powerful competitors. I think a lot of this is due to some clever post-processing tricks and a lighting engine that is genuinely impressive. Capcom's MT framework has always been a versatile engine, but smooth per-pixel lighting like this shows it was capable of way more than any of us knew, at least given the small amount of system resources it was using. And let's face it, up until recently, this was the only way we could experience anything close to an RE2 remake. Honestly, this may be the best looking Wii game I've ever seen. But it's not all rainbows and sunshine. This high level of visual detail causes the frame rate to fluctuate often, and scenes with a lot of fog or particle effects are the worst offenders. Now, I can deal with a low overall frame rate, but when the FPS dips and climbs a lot, it becomes hard to ignore, especially when the frame chugs affect your on-screen cursor. Next up on my list of very small issues, some character models can look a bit shiny, which was a real problem for the Unreal Engine back in this game's day, but I can't remember any other MT framework games having a similar issue. And since I've run out of minuscule things to complain about, let's check out the one and only port available. The HD Selection version seems to be a pretty simple up-res job. As you can see, the aliasing is still present here, just masked a bit by the higher resolution. The only real change to speak of is a lack of decapitation effects, which is a real shame. I mean, I've seen a head get blown off in a video game before, but seeing nothing but the bottom jaw and a row of teeth after a headshot is really something that deserves the HD treatment. Something I would prefer didn't get the HD treatment is the slowdown that somehow still exists here. Even on a console that demolishes the resources Darkside used to make do with, for some reason the game still slows down in the exact same spots. Now, I can't for the life of me figure this one out, but hey, I guess you can call this an incredibly accurate port. Other than that, this is a relatively simple and straightforward deal. It's the exact same game in every visual way, other than a few replaced fonts. Definitely a jump up in quality, but call me crazy, I actually might prefer the look of the Wii version. In the HD Selection, the clean looking graphics can make a lot of visual flaws a little more noticeable, and I kind of just like the look of this specific kind of detail-rich 480p. Listen, if you're even a little curious about this game, I'd say just go ahead and take the plunge. It stays below the $20 mark for a complete used copy, and it might be the most fun I've ever had with this type of shooter. On top of that, it's a very cool way to relive some classic RE moments. The graphics will blow you away for a Wii game, but outside of the technically interesting, well-optimized look of the game, I just can't get over how cool it is seeing all these familiar settings with a new coat of paint on them. Without a doubt, this game has been the most entertaining spin-off we've covered so far in the retrospective, and a non-numbered RE game that I can fully recommend. Having said that, I have to get back to work. I hope you guys stay tuned because I think it's finally time to tackle the 7th official entry in the series, but until then, I'll see you guys right here on the Resident Evil Retrospective. Hey guys, thanks for swinging by. Listen, instead of plugging my other videos, I just wanted to give the hardest and most sincere thank you to my Patreon backers. The people you're seeing on the list here are the reason I'm covering all these RE games, and I just can't say thank you enough. For real, guys, you're the best.